Greetings and welcome to Gripping Horror. This is Morrison Quarry, a site known for both its stunning beauty and perilous depths. While many have enjoyed its allure and lived to tell the tale, many have not been as fortunate. Beyond the headlines, countless near misses remain unreported, where divers have narrowly escaped tragedy and non-divers have encountered dangerous situations that could have ended in disaster. Since 1941, the Morrison Quarry has been a must-stop destination for visitors and locals alike in the Outaouais and National Capital Region of Canada. The quarry used to be an active quarry specializing in the recovery of brucite. From there, it's now transformed into a beautiful scenic recreation area, visited by thousands every year. Located just off Highway 105 in Wakefield, Quebec, Morrison Quarry is one of the region's most popular sites for scuba training. In addition to its appeal for divers, it serves as a bustling campground and hosts concerts and festivals during the summer months. For thrill seekers, it even features a 200-foot bungee jump, which is the highest bungee jumping site in Canada, making it a dynamic destination. The quarry's striking green-blue, slightly murky waters reach a depth of 139 feet, offering visibility that ranges from about 25 feet during the warmest summer months to over 100 feet in the cooler spring and fall. Divers will encounter two distinct thermoclines that drop the water temperature to a frigid 4 to 5 degrees Celsius near the bottom, regardless of how hot it is on the surface. Winding around the quarry's perimeter is an old access road, resembling gigantic steps that spiral downwards. Underwater, divers can explore various sunken attractions, including a plane at 35 feet and a tugboat resting at 60 feet. Adding to the quarry's intriguing underwater landscape are two cars, one deliberately driven off the edge during the filming of a movie action scene, and the other a remnant of a botched car theft. Despite its scenic beauty and recreational appeal, Morrison's Quarry has been the site of several tragic accidents for divers and non-divers. On July 7, 2003, during the annual Wet Net event, which often involves excessive drinking and antics among participants, divers discovered the unresponsive body of 25-year-old Joanne Bundler. Unfortunately, not much is known about the circumstances surrounding her death. Another tragedy occurred on July 7, 2015, when 35-year-old David Rothwell from Ottawa ignored posted warnings and shouts of protest before jumping from a 23-meter cliff into the quarry's waters. The incident took place while he was visiting the quarry with his 8-year-old daughter and a friend. After resurfacing briefly, Rothwell disappeared beneath the surface. Despite rescue attempts by a vacationing Montreal police officer, Rothwell's body was recovered the following morning by divers. Morrison's Quarry presents unique risks for both divers and non-divers alike. The frigid temperatures at deeper levels, coupled with submerged structures like sunken planes and boats, create a challenging environment beneath the water. Above the surface, steep cliffs and hazardous jumping points add danger for swimmers and thrill seekers. Whether exploring its depths or enjoying recreational activities, understanding and respecting these dangers is crucial for anyone at the quarry. Marco Laplante was a 53-year-old man from Gatineau, Quebec, known for his adventurous spirit and love for diving. Having recently obtained his general diving certification less than a year before, Marco was eager to attempt more challenging conditions, including his first dive under the ice during the winter season. On March the 23rd, 2014, Marco, along with two friends, arrived at Morrison Quarry for Marco's first ice dive. As the trio intend to dive at Morrison Quarry, they needed to sign a logbook showing that they're PADI or SSI certified. After performing their pre-dive checks, the three divers entered the water independently, starting from a shallow bay area to explore the plane wreck at a depth of around 36 feet. The group was not part of an organized course, although an ice diving course held by firefighters was simultaneously being conducted nearby. There were 2 holes in the ice that day, one over the plain, used for the ice diving course, and another in the shallow bay, where the 3 divers planned to enter through. The water temperature was extremely cold, complicating the dive. As the trio entered the water through the shallow bay, where 2 unrelated divers had opened the hole earlier in the day. However, as the trio entered, no continuous line to the surface was established, violating standard cave and ice diving protocols. There were no tender divers, ropes, or safety divers present. In addition, there was a lack of redundancy in equipment, particularly concerning air supply. Marco had little experience with ice diving and was not qualified for this type of dive. While descending with his buddy divers, Marco went approximately 125 feet deep. About 10 minutes into the dive, he appeared to panic and had already consumed more than half of his air supply, which was exacerbated by the cold water and overhead conditions. Marco was known to consume a lot of oxygen during dives, was prone to panic, and hyperventilated easily. Feeling overwhelmed and disoriented, he struggled to regain control of his buoyancy and direction in the icy depths. After being brought up to 35 feet by his buddies, he seemed okay, but quickly became lost from sight. Marco's struggle went unnoticed by his buddies, who surfaced without him and could not find Marco at the exit hole. There was no one tending a line, keeping it taut for tug signals and ready to haul the divers in case of problems. There was no one to pull them out of the hole. The situation Marco found himself in was nearly impossible to get out without a lot of help. Heavy wetsuits or dry suits and weights, combined with low dexterity due to cold and equipment, make it extremely difficult to get out. Without a lifeline firmly attached to a harness and a surface line tender to keep the line taut and to pull him in if necessary, Marco had almost no chance of getting to the exit hole. A diver simply cannot see the hole in the ice from below, given the relatively low visibility in most quarries. Testimony accounts of many ice divers stated all they've seen is a glowing circle of light above, been within feet of the hole, and if not for the line, would have never known it was there. It seems Marco submerged, believing he could easily locate the exit above, only to realize he couldn't see it. In a panic, he swam desperately in search of the hole until the very end. Unfortunately, he was just 30 feet from safety of the exit hole when the situation became critical, ultimately leading to Marco running out of air. An instructor who was with the group of firefighters in training made an emergency dive and quickly found the body at around 12:30 p.m. Despite several resuscitation attempts made by the firefighters, Marco was pronounced dead at hospital. Police stated an autopsy would be performed the week after the accident at the Laboratory of Forensic Science and Medicine in Montreal, in order to establish the exact cause of death. There, the equipment Marco used would also be examined. In their findings, it was found that Marco likely ran out of air due to a combination of inexperience and panic. As he descended to a depth of 125 feet, the cold water and overhead conditions likely contributed to a heightened sense of anxiety, causing him to mismanage his air supply. In an unfamiliar environment, without proper equipment, redundancy, and training, he failed to monitor his air consumption effectively. This panic, coupled with his previous history of air consumption rates and the challenging dive conditions, likely led to his critical situation before he could safely surface. The examination showed no signs of external violence, and toxicology tests were negative for alcohol and common drugs. A detailed assessment of Marco's diving equipment confirmed it was safe and functional. There was significant pulmonary congestion and evidence of pink frothy fluid, both indicative of drowning. An internal examination at LSJML showed no traumatic injuries. Pink frothy fluid was still visible at the mouth. No signs of gas embolism were found in the radiography. The internal examination showed no fractures, and the lungs weighed 1,810 grams, indicating drowning. The heart displayed moderate atherosclerotic heart disease with up to 70% coronary artery occlusion. The liver and kidneys were congested. No subcutaneous emphysema was noted, and the eardrums were intact. 3 major lessons can be learned from Marco's tragic incident. 1. Inexperience and lack of training. Marco lacked proper training for ice and overhead environments. He had only recently obtained his certification, and this was his first dive under ice. 2. Buddy system failure. Maintaining close contact with dive buddies is essential, especially in challenging conditions. Marco was left behind while the others exited, indicating a breakdown in the buddy system that is critical for safety in diving. 3. Absence of safety protocols. Never dive in overhead with a single tank, if not tethered. No safety divers were present, and the absence of a tether or continuous line and no air redundancy significantly increased the risk of the dive. These factors, Marco's inexperience, the failure of the buddy system, and the absence of essential safety protocols, paint a concerning picture of his dive. His eagerness to learn and engage in new experiences, while commendable, highlights the critical need for divers to be fully prepared and adequately trained. As friends and admired his adventurous spirit, it is a tragic reminder that enthusiasm must always be matched with a strong commitment to safety and adherence to established diving practices. Marco was described by those around him as sociable and eager to learn, often diving with friends and instructors who admired his willingness to take on new experiences. His commitment to the sport and camaraderie with fellow divers highlighted the vibrant community he was part of in Gatineau. He was the husband of Nancy Montmy and the son of Roger Laplante and Jacqueline Borsford. In addition to his wife and parents, he is survived by his daughter Naomi and Nancy's daughter Emily. He also leaves his sisters, Claude and Natalie, as well as several other relatives and friends. The family received condolences on Monday, March the 31st, 2014, from 11 a.m. at the Coopérative Funéraire de la Haute-Oie. A prayer celebration in the presence of the ashes was followed at 2 p.m. at the Coopérative. May he rest in peace. Jean-Michel Nadon, a 24-year-old diver, was preparing for a dive with a friend at Morrison Quarry in July 2019. Certified in dry suit diving in Western Canada, Jean had completed 7 cold water dives, according to his logbook. Though his experience was limited, he had been trained for the cold water environment of the quarry, which, as stated prior, is a popular training site for diving schools. This was his first visit to the quarry, where the various objects such as cars and planes submerged at different depths were of specific interest. Jean arrived at Morrison Quarry on July 28, 2019, with plans to complete 4 dives that day. He and a friend successfully completed 3 dives between noon and 5 p.m., though Jean-Michel experienced minor difficulties on his ascent during the 3rd dive. Unfortunately, the pair decided to push forward with a 4th dive after insufficient rest time, skipping the crucial pre-dive safety check that would have ensured their equipment was fully functional for the 4th dive. During this 4th dive, which took place late in the afternoon, Jean-Michel and his friend descended to a depth of 92 feet. At this point, Jean-Michel appeared to struggle with his breathing apparatus and signaled for assistance. His friend offered him the octopus, a secondary regulator, but unbeknownst to him, the mouthpiece lacked a nylon tie wrap, which compromised its functionality. As Jean-Michel attempted to breathe from it, water infiltrated the mouthpiece to the point of making it impossible to take a breath of air. This caused Jean extreme panic, not to mention the more than likely suffocation caused by ingesting this water when Jean tried to breathe on his buddy's regulator. In a hurried attempt to reach the surface, both divers began ascending rapidly. When a diver dives deeper than 60 feet, he has no way of ensuring his own air supply to the surface. Even if a diver uses their buddy's emergency regulator, two divers on the same air source from this depth will quickly exhaust the only air reserve available. Wearing an additional air source ensures that the diver or buddy has sufficient air supply until the surface. At a depth of 60 feet, Jean-Michel's friend lost sight of him and, upon surfacing, realized Jean-Michel had not followed. Panicked, his friend immediately called 911. Emergency personnel arrived quickly, and at 6:23 p.m., two diving instructors familiar with the quarry began searching underwater. Jean-Michel's body was discovered at a depth of 106 feet, around 6:33 p.m., with his oxygen valve only partially open, which had prevented his buoyancy vest from inflating. Rescue efforts were attempted as his body was brought to the surface, but tragically, Jean-Michel was pronounced dead at 6:46 p.m., his death resulting from drowning, compounded by the equipment malfunction and procedural errors that could have been prevented with a proper pre-dive check that the pair unfortunately skipped, which, according to the testimonies gathered, was not carried out. This step consists of a check between pairs to ensure that divers are ready and that the configuration is adequate and functional for a safe dive. One of the steps is to check the valves and the operation of both regulators. According to his autopsy, an external examination was performed on July 29, 2019, at a local Gatineau morgue. It revealed the presence of characteristic drowning foam around the mouth and nose. There were no signs of violence, trauma, or third-party intervention. Virtual and conventional autopsies were performed on July the 30th and 31st, 2019, at the Montreal Heart Institute and the Laboratoire des Sciences Judiciaire et de Médecine Légale de Montréal. Signs of drowning were observed, as well as air in the polygon of Willis. The right eardrum was ruptured. There were no pre-existing lesions to explain death. The changes were consistent with drowning and signs of rapid ascent to the surface. Toxicological tests were performed at the Laboratoire des Sciences Judiciaire et de Médecine Légale in Montreal. His blood alcohol was negative, and no other substances were detected. The diving equipment had also been appraised by La Boutique de Plongeur L'été, division of ACR Canada. The equipment was in good condition, although used and rented. It was noted that the regulator was ill-adjusted, making it harder to breathe. Dive data from the computer showed Jean at 91 feet after 3 minutes of diving. 1 minute later, he climbed to 74 feet, and 1 minute later, he was at a depth of 106 feet and didn't seem to move for the next 91 minutes. The conclusion was that the regulator and octopus regulator were maladjusted. Jean only breathed during the first 4 to 5 minutes of the dive and did not run out of air, confirmed by the 2,900 psi remaining pressure. The coroner made 3 recommendations to the Ministry of Education and Higher Education for better protection of human life, namely to introduce a preventative measure so that a diver has in his possession a pre-dive checklist, that a diver has in his possession an alternative air source, and that he follows an update of his knowledge and skills if he is inactive for a period of more than 18 months. Unfortunately, this was an accidental and preventable death. In his short life of 24 years, his charismatic personality made a positive impact on everyone he met. Predeceased by his mother, Micheline Soulard Levesque Nadon, is survived by his grieving father, Serge Nadon, and his brother Jacob. He will be missed by all relatives and dear friends. A celebration of his life was held on Sunday, November 10th, 2019, at the Rivermead Golf Club from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. in lieu of flowers. May Jean-Paul rest in peace. Morrison Quarry has witnessed multiple tragic incidents over the years, serving as a somber reminder of the risks in both diving and thrill-seeking activities. The deaths of Marco Laplante, Jean-Michel Nadon, David Rothwell, and Joanne Bundelar are part of a series of unfortunate accidents that highlight the need for rigorous safety measures. Despite the quarry's popularity as a training site for divers and its recreational appeal, these fatalities emphasize how easily oversight, carelessness, lack of training, and inadequate preparation can lead to irreversible outcomes. May all its victims rest in peace. Ice diving and cave diving are similar in that both take place in extreme, confined environments where direct access to the surface is limited. In each, divers must navigate back to specific entry points, making emergencies extremely more dangerous. Both require precise navigation, reliance on safety lines, and specialized equipment due to low visibility and freezing conditions. Any mistake or equipment failure in these environments can quickly turn fatal. In the Arctic Ocean, 500 miles north of Barrow, Alaska, the Coast Guard cutter Healy was on a mission unlike any other. At 3:55 p.m. on August 17, 2006, this icebreaker wasn't just cutting through the frozen seas, it was pushing boundaries, exploring uncharted waters, and conducting critical scientific research for the future of marine science. In the late afternoon hours of this summer day, 3 Coast Guard divers from the cutter Healy attempted to conduct cold water familiarization dives at a planned depth of 20 feet of seawater during an iced liberty stop on the Arctic ice. After one of the divers exited the water due to an equipment malfunction, the 2 remaining divers continued the dive in 29-degree Fahrenheit waters. A routine training dive, meant to strengthen the skills of the crew, will become one of the deadliest days in US Coast Guard history, with many lessons learned from this tragic event. Lieutenant Jessica Hill, born in Saranac Lake, New York, and raised in St. Augustine, Florida, was a 30-year-old marine science officer aboard the USCGC Healy, in charge of executing every last detail of Healy's unprecedented science missions, from start to finish, including science support diving. Hill reported aboard the Healy in the best shape of her life because Arctic science diving requires it. With a master's degree in marine science from the University of South Alabama, she was passionate about the ocean and science, excelling in her role as the liaison between the ship's crew and scientists. Jessica was also the vessel's dive officer, having completed the rigorous Navy dive school in Panama City, Florida, where she stood out among her peers. Unfortunately, that's not all she was asked to do. A bare-bones crew on the technologically advanced Healy makes perfect sense, except that there must be enough qualified people to drive it. Jessica at one point drove the Healy 3 times a day for 4-hour stretches, every day. As if that weren't enough, she also performed the duties of dive officer, assistant operations officer, morale officer, and civil rights officer. Known for her vibrant personality, intelligence, and physical strength, Jessica was admired by her colleagues and loved by her family. Petty Officer Second Class Stephen Duke, a 26-year-old from Miami, Florida, was also aboard the Healy. He was a driven and hard-working boatswain's mate in the Coast Guard. Raised in the vibrant city of Miami, Stephen found his calling in the Coast Guard, where he quickly worked his way through the ranks. Though relatively new to cold water diving, having used a dry suit only once during training, Stephen was determined to take on the challenge of diving in the Arctic. His colleagues admired him for his professionalism, dedication, and ability to inspire others to take their responsibilities seriously. Stephen approached his work with a deep sense of purpose, and joining the dive team above the Healy marked a significant step in his career. Since its inception in 1790 as a tariff collection service, the United States Coast Guard has seen its workload multiply exponentially, The USCGC Healy is a state-of-the-art polar-class icebreaker and one of the most advanced vessels in the US Coast Guard fleet, commissioned on August 28, 1999. Named after Captain Edward H. Healy, this formidable cutter stretches 420 feet in length and is equipped with a reinforced hull that enables it to break through ice up to 8 feet thick. With a displacement of approximately 16,000 tons, the Healy combines diesel and gas turbine propulsion, allowing it to navigate the challenging conditions of the Arctic and Antarctic regions. Unlike its sister ships, Polar Star and Polar Sea, the Healy is a science platform first, icebreaker second. It plays host to a greater number of Arctic scientists than the Coast Guard has ever accommodated before. Its primary mission is to conduct scientific research, boasting sophisticated laboratories that support disciplines such as oceanography, biology, and geology. The cutter facilitates access for other research vessels, providing logistical support for vital studies related to climate change and marine ecosystems. In addition to its scientific endeavors, the Healy engages in search and rescue operations and law enforcement, playing a critical role in enforcing US laws in the maritime domain. As the Arctic becomes increasingly significant due to climate shifts and resource exploration, the Healy stands as a vital asset for national security and environmental research, contributing essential insights into one of the world's most rapidly changing regions. The diving officer, Lieutenant Jessica Hill, was the most experienced diver assigned to the vessel and was the only qualified diving supervisor. Her total diving experience was 2 years and 3 months, with 24 dives performed since completing dive school, of which 0 were conducted in cold water scuba. Stephen had been a qualified diver for 5 months and had 2 career dives since completing dive school, of which 0 were performed in cold water scuba. Unfortunately, both Jessica and Stephen lacked experience in cold water scuba diving, a critical skill needed for the dive that took place on August 17, 2006. In addition, Stephen Duke had not conducted a dive in the 10 months preceding the mishap. The commanding officer, Captain Douglas Russell, the executive officer, Commander Robert D. Henneman, and the operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Sharon L. Allen, were also not qualified divers and had not received formal diving operations training. The 420-foot icebreaker had been on a research mission and stopped for the first time in a month in the late afternoon hours of the 17th of August, 2006. The ship stopped on the ice for liberty, including several recreational type events and alcohol consumption. The air temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water temperature was 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds were 8 knots. Ice covering was 9/10, with a thickness of 3 to 4 feet of multi-year pack. The below ice water depth was estimated at 1,420 meters, or 4,649 feet. On the morning of the planned ice liberty, the diving officer, Lieutenant Jessica Hill, recognized the opportunity to perform a dive, while many other crew members were drinking beer and hard lemonade and playing football as part of approved liberty. The ship's divers were very inexperienced, and the belief was this was an excellent opportunity to create proficiency and maintain qualification for the dive team. The submitted plan identified 3 divers performing cold water dives in single scuba with full face masks. All divers would wear dry suits and buoyancy compensators. Lieutenant Jessica Hill would be the diving supervisor and would perform this task while actively participating in the dive as a working diver. Petty Officers Second Class David J. Penning and Stephen Duke would dive with Jessica. No standby diver was assigned. The dive tenders would be the ship's force personnel that were not military dive qualified and were responsible for monitoring the divers during their dive. they had limited training and received only basic instructions on the line pull signals used during scuba diving. The commanding officer, Captain Douglas Russell, operating officer, Lieutenant Commander Robert C. Smith, Stephen Duke, and one dive tender posed questions to Dive Officer Lieutenant Jessica Hill regarding the plan's validity. Jessica assured each of them the dive was permitted by diving policy. The chain of command determined the dive to be a routine operation with minimal risk and approved. The commanding officer, Captain Douglas Russell, who was responsible for the safe conduct of all dive operations, lacked familiarity with the dive procedures, which is why he approved the plan. The entire approval process took approximately 30 minutes without the required risk assessments and checkout procedures. Jessica alone told the command cadre that the dive was within regulations, even though, according to Navy regulations, the team would have needed at least 4 qualified divers to conduct the exercise, 2 in the water, 1 on standby, and a dive supervisor. On the day of the dive, the area was not cordoned off from the Ice Liberty revelers as required by the Navy Diving Manual, which is used along with the US Coast Guard Diving Manual. There was no dive log, no time kept at the dive site, and the Navy Dive Manual was not at the site, contrary to regulations. The site was 60 feet off the port bow of the Healy, but out of view of the pilot house. Additionally, there was no communication link between the dive team and wheelhouse. The dive station was set up on the open ice, with no shelter. Stephen arrived with equipment 40 minutes before Jessica and David, but as he waited for the other divers who were delayed, he lay down on the ice, an action prohibited by the Navy Dive Manual because it can cause heat loss and equipment failure. With no protection, diving equipment was staged directly on the ice. Jessica recruited a few crew members partying nearby as dive tenders. They had no training or experience in the work. 2 of the tenders had been drinking. However, Jessica and Stephen had not taken part in the Ice Liberty and hadn't been drinking before the dive. Once the remaining divers and dive tenders were on station and ready, Jessica performed an informal dive brief that included basic instructions to the dive tenders of the meaning of the line pull signals used during scuba diving. 1 tug means "okay," she had told the tenders. 1 tug upon descent, however, according to the Navy Dive Manual, the Bible for military divers, also means stop. None of the tenders remembers her telling them that. No formal checklists were used, and no operation risk management brief was conducted. Once the dive brief and tender familiarization training were completed, the tenders assisted the divers with donning the equipment. All divers were equipped with a single steel 100 cubic foot tank, full-face AGA mask with an additional regulator, a dry suit, and a buoyancy compensator with 40 pounds of weight distributed between the jettison pockets and the zippered utility pockets. The dry suit inflation hose was connected to the first stage regulator, but the buoyancy compensator inflators were not. Jessica and Stephen wore split fins, which are designed for speed and provide minimal thrust. None of the divers wore weight belts, as required, which allow to get rid of weight in an emergency. The dive plan specified that on the first dive, divers would go to 20 feet. All 3 divers entered the water and conducted in-water checks. Almost immediately, David had water intrusion into his dry suit. The suit inflation would not operate, and he could not maintain proper buoyancy. He discussed these issues with Lieutenant Jessica Hill, and they decided that David would return to the dive locker to search for a new dry suit. He exited the water and departed the dive station. While David was dealing with his equipment issues, Jessica and Stephen determined they were too buoyant and added approximately 10 additional pounds of weight in their BCD for a total of around 60 pounds each, twice the recommended amount. The buoyancy control device has pockets to carry and, if necessary, jettison weight. However, Jessica and Stephen filled not only the weight pockets, but also the equipment pockets of the buoyancy control device. Thus, much of the diver's weight was not easily jettisonable. This posed a serious danger, increasing the risk of decompression sickness, commonly known as the bends. Once they made the final adjustments, Jessica and Stephen descended below the surface without David. Approximately 5 minutes into the dive, Stephen experienced water intrusion into his gloves and had to exit the water to rewarm his hands. Jessica remained in the water but was on the surface. After a 10-minute rewarming period, Stephen replaced his gloves and re-entered the water. It was noted that his hands were still cold and lacked the dexterity to make the standard OK hand signal, so it was agreed that the thumbs up signal would be used instead. It's unclear why Jessica chose not to call off the dive, despite the series of issues that had arisen. Both divers again descended below the surface. The tenders paid out some line, and Jessica and Stephen descended a few feet. Both were visible to the tenders when Jessica sent one line pull signal. The tenders understood this to mean the divers were okay, so they allowed more slack in the line. Tender number 1 observed both divers' lines paying out fairly quickly. Upon seeing that Jessica's line was close to being fully paid out, Tender 1 stepped on the line to stop it. Tender 1 then felt a single tug on the line, and thus continued to pay out additional line. Tender number 2 initially observed the divers down to about 15 feet, but then lost sight. Jessica and Stephen appeared to go under the ice. The untrained dive tenders at first thought they might be still at 20 feet, but swimming under the ice. Early in the dive, tender number 2 felt a moderate strain on his line. He then became distracted by the ship's personnel engaging in ice liberty events that had encroached on the dive station and inadvertently stepped on a tending line. Approximately 3 minutes after the divers submerged, tender number 2 stated that the line sped out in a fast and forceful way that required him to ask for help from a bystander. The line paid out for about 15 seconds, slowed slightly for a few seconds, then again increased in speed. As the diver's line sank faster and faster, the novice dive tenders grew increasingly confused and alarmed. Jessica and Stephen would have experienced a loss of buoyancy because air volume compresses at that level and provides less buoyancy. Divers wearing excessive weight would have to counteract the loss by adding air to their suits or jettisoning weight. As stated previously, the pair's added weights were zipped into their dry suit pockets, making it impossible for them to drop them. Believing that about 100 feet of line had paid out, tender number 2 and his assistant stopped the line and gave pulls on the line to which no return pull was received. Both dive tenders had permitted the line to pay out until there was not much left on the spool, and they were concerned they might lose the line because it was not anchored to the ice. The total bottom time at this point was approximately 10 minutes. Second Petty Officer David J. Finning returned to the dive station and quickly determined that something was wrong. 4 pulls were sent to both divers and no response was received. Tenders observing the dive failed to understand that the 2 had dropped to greater than planned depths until it was too late. At this point, David directed that both divers be recovered immediately. The total bottom time at this point was approximately 20 minutes. The tenders began retrieval of divers at an initial rate of 1 foot per minute. At about 40 feet, both divers could be seen and appeared to be unconscious. Jessica and Stephen ran out of air. Both divers were then rapidly recovered to the surface, pulled from the water, and resuscitation efforts started at approximately 6:48 p.m. Both Jessica and Stephen had been submerged for approximately 23 minutes. Jessica's depth gauge showed a maximum depth of 185 feet, and Stephen's depth gauge was maxed out, showing 200 feet. Both divers were unresponsive and lacked vital signs. Neither diver had jettisoned any weight. The crew on the surface attempted resuscitation, but they were not successful. Approximately 1 hour and 13 minutes after reaching the surface, both divers were pronounced dead at approximately 8 p.m. Stephen's air tank was depleted and Jessica's pressure was so low it was essentially empty. An autopsy found both divers died from lack of oxygen, with severe air pressure damage to the lungs, including possible air bubbles in the circulatory system. The bottom line is that this dive should have never occurred. Had Healy's commanding officer, executive officer, operations officer and dive team followed policies established in Coast Guard and Navy diving manuals, they would have not permitted diving operations. The investigation following this event identified over 70 human factors that either directly caused or contributed to this event. A human factor is considered causal when removal of that human factor from the sequence of events would likely have broken the chain of errors, and the mishap would not have occurred. A human factor is considered contributory when it is not singularly responsible for the mishap. However, when combined with causal or other contributory errors, it influenced the mishap's progression. Approximately 26 factors were determined causal, and 45 were contributory. Think about this. There were at least 26 opportunities to avoid this mishap, 26 chances to prevent the death of 2 military divers. The following is a condensed summary of the findings. 1. Command oversight. The chain of command did not properly assess the hazards associated with the dive, identify the procedural inadequacy of the plan, and did not prevent the operation from occurring when they had doubts about procedural compliance. 2. Planning. The plan presented by Jessica lacked technical competence and failed to comply with established procedures in all regards. 3. Training. The entire chain of command, every diver and every dive tender involved lacked the training necessary to perform this dive safely. 4. Equipment. The divers were not outfitted with equipment suitable for this dive, were overweighted, and their BC inflators were not connected. The investigation also found that Jessica's diving certificate had lapsed. The Healy's previous commander in April signed one, but of the 4 dives in 6 months Jessica was to have made to requalify for her certification, 2 were later found to have been recreational, so they didn't count. The report said, many military divers will have questions regarding the divers' emergency actions during this event. Why didn't they climb the tended line? Why didn't they inflate their dry suits? Why didn't they send out other line pull signals? Why didn't they ditch their weight? Although these questions can never be fully answered, physical task oversaturation could have been a factor. At a minimum, the divers would have had to 1. Recognize what was happening. 2. Clear their ears. 3. Inflate their dry suits. 4. Drop their weights. 5. Signal each other. And 6. Signal the tenders. Each task's number and complexity likely exceeded their training and ability to perform in such a compressed period of time, especially with hands that were too cold to make an OK sign and a dry suit that was likely squeezing them. Many red flags existed that should have resulted in stopping this dive. It is difficult to understand how so many things could have gone wrong to result in this tragedy. If you take one thing away from this mishap, please let it be that every person involved in a dive has the ability to ask questions, raise safety concerns, or provide better technical information to those involved. The military dive community rarely suffers a loss due to wartime action or essential military operations. It is the non-essential dives conducted for training or other routine events that result in the most fatalities, and those fatalities are most often a result of the actions of personnel, not equipment. Complex diving operations performed in arduous conditions are routinely completed without incident, due to effective planning, training, qualification, and supervision. Remove one of those 4 essential factors, and even an easy dive becomes dangerous. The vessel's 3 top officers were found to be in dereliction of duty at an admiral's mast held on January the 11th. The commanding officer and operations officer received letters of reprimand. The executive officer received a letter of admonition. Pay forfeitures for the commanding officer and operations officer were suspended. Immediately following the accident, the Coast Guard instituted a number of changes in its dive program. It conducted a safety stand-down and inspections of all dive units, held training for divers who deployed last year on the icebreaker Polar Sea, and developed a dive training module for commanders at the prospective commanding officer and executive officer afloat course, and elsewhere. Their deaths will not be in vain if the actions proposed by the Coast Guard resulting from this investigation are implemented, and no other family member will go through what we have experienced, Jessica's family said. The sea, like the Arctic ice, is unforgiving, and in both, preparation is not just important, it is a matter of survival. Lieutenant Jessica Hill and Petty Officer Stephen Duke, though dedicated and driven, were failed by a series of lapses in judgment and protocol. Their tragic deaths stand as a stark reminder that even the most skilled and passionate individuals are not immune to the dangers of the environment when proper precautions are overlooked. Their loss was not just a tragedy, but a lesson, one that emphasizes the need for rigorous safety measures and respect for the unpredictability of nature. Font Estramar resembles a complex labyrinth of corridors and dead ends, where losing your way is not an option. Due to the numerous accidents, Font Estramar has a very bad reputation as a killer sinkhole. In 1955, during a television shoot with Kukulka Cave, diver Jean-Claude Guittard lost his way in an annex of the South Gallery and died there before his body was eventually sealed in the cave. This fatal accident justified a temporary ban on diving at Font Estramar. But the popularity of this Catalan source only continued to grow, and unfortunately, the Black Series continued. These are the Font Estramar disasters. Font Estramar, well known to divers around the world, is the deepest resurgence explored in diving in Europe and the 5th deepest in the world. It was on the initiative of Professor Petit, director of the Arago Laboratory in Bagnols-sur-Mer, that on August the 27th, 1949, 2 officers of the 11th BPC, Shock Parachute Battalion, Lieutenant Dupay and Lieutenant George, dived into the abyss, equipped with a Cousteau-Gagnon autonomous diving apparatus. They dove through an entrance in the form of a porch about 4 meters below the surface, at the very foot of the cliff which overlooks the basin. From there, they progress into a vertical shaft approximately 6 meters high, opening into a large, totally submerged room, 14 meters from where 2 opposing galleries appear to branch off, one towards the south and the other towards the north. Noting that these galleries continue to sink inexorably into the mountain, the divers prefer not to explore further and decide to go back up for lack of more suitable equipment. Followed by the expeditions carried out in 1951 by Cousteau, Tazieff and other great divers, several secondary galleries were explored around the main conduit. The depth reached in 1955 was 50 meters, the techniques of the time not allowing it to go any lower. In the 1970s, Claude Toulon GM explored a total of 850 meters of galleries in several branches of the network. In 1981, Francis Leguin advanced in the main conduit to the Well of Silence, 410 meters, and explored it down to 58 meters. In 1991, the ARFE Research Association of Font Estramar was created, and the depth of 164 meters was reached on August the 15th, 1997, by the Swiss Cyril Brandt. Pascal Barnaby continued to 184 meters on June the 4th, 2006. Jordi Heller, a Catalan diver, descended to 191 meters without finding a continuation of the sump in July 2013. On August the 16th, 2013, Xavier Meniscus, equipped with a double rebreather and helped by a large international team, continued the exploration of the cavity in the giant locum well, located 513 meters from the entrance to a depth of 248 meters, 900 meters from the start, bringing the development of the cavity to approximately 2,900 meters. In July 2015, the same diver, with the help of around 15 team members, pushed back the exploration by around 30 meters to a depth of 262 meters. In June 2019, Xavier Meniscus continued his exploration over a distance of 50 meters horizontally to a depth of 262 meters to reach the lip of a vertical well. After these 3 explorations, on December the 30th, 2019, Xavier Meniscus descended to 286 meters in the bowels of Font Estramar at a distance of 1,020 meters from the entrance. On November the 3rd, 2013, Marcel diver Frederick Scharczynski reached the depth of 308 meters, a new world record, during a 6.59-hour dive. The abyss itself belongs to a private family of cells. The cliff is the property of the town hall. The municipality, like the owners, has installed prohibition signs. Prohibition of diving and swimming for the municipality. Several meetings have already been organised on the safety of the premises, but divers' associations demand that it remain accessible and open. Specialised firefighters, especially from the Aude, state that it is important that they can train on this type of site, that it can save lives during future interventions. These discussions and contrasting views on access all began after the town experienced a pivotal moment in the summer of 1955. In the summer of 1955, excitement rippled through the coastal town of Sousse-le-Château as Commander Jacques Cousteau's iconic boat, L'Île Monieur, graced their shores. Eager to showcase the marvels of Font Estramar, a group of intrepid explorers, including Dumas and his brother Jean-Claude Gaultier, eagerly awaited the commander's visit. Unlike the commander's first visit in 1951, on this trip they planned to create a film about the cave, as Gorak Tassif had a film about groundwater to be finished, and the Gaultier brothers told him about the magnificent resurgence of Font Estramar, which they so loved. The first shot is going very well. Gorak Tassif is delighted, but had to ascend with Dumas to recharge his camera. Meanwhile, Jacques, Jean-Claude and another diver by the name of Cacheroux planned to take a look at a new gallery, discovered a few tens of meters from the basin. After some time passed, only 2 divers emerged, and Jean-Claude was not one of them. Still in shock, Jacques explained what happened to Dumas and Gorak. The 3 divers followed each other in this new gallery for a few meters, and then they turned the dive and planned to return. But, unexpectedly, a wall of brown water advanced towards them. In the split of a second, they couldn't see anything anymore. While all the galleries are crystal clear, the bottom of it is covered with a powdery silt that the gallery they were in succumbed to. It was at this point that Jean-Claude became separated from the group. Dumas knew that his brother only had a few minutes of life left, so he hastily grabbed his diving gear and prepared to descend. Gorak Tassif tried to stop him, but nothing, nor anyone could stop Dumas from going back down to look for his brother. The always extraordinary visibility had become equal to 0. Dumas went down as much as the lifeline permitted. He had to find Jean very quickly under the penalty of death, but he couldn't see anything. After a very long, terrible moment, Dumas turned towards the exit and the light. There's nothing more he could do. There was a very low chance that Jean had reached a pocket of air and was waiting there in the dark for rescue. Dumas would have to give his parents the hardest phone call of his life. After the accident, Dumas went to see Cousteau in Paris, who sent his great team from Marseille to continue the search for Jean, but to no avail, leading to the heartbreaking decision to cease any further attempts. It is only 3 years after the incident, a great diver friend of Dumas, Mr. Bonneau, found Jean by chance. He was stuck in a chimney, almost invisible near the exit, located at a depth of 7 meters. Due to the position and difficulty with Jean's body was stuck, it was deemed unsafe to try and execute a body recovery operation. Dumas's friend Galeron and his underwater works company, Sogetram, blocked the entrance to the gallery at Dumas' request. Jean-Claude, one of the fingers of my hand, my brother, with whom I shared everything for 23 years. He entered the basin and I never saw him again. How is it possible? I try every day to remember his voice, his laughter. Rest there, Jean-Claude, in this chasm that you loved. On May the 27th, 2008, tragedy would once again cast its shadow over Font Estramar. The weather, though turbulent during days that built up to this tragedy, hinted at the possibility of reckless risk-taking as the cause of the calamity. Yet, the truth proved far more harrowing. A duo of Czech divers, their identities which have never been revealed to the public, embarked on a fateful journey into the depths of the Estramar chasm. Only one of the divers emerged from the abyss, leaving behind many unanswered questions and a sense of profound loss for his buddy. It was reported that one of the divers, aged 33, succumbed to discomfort over 100 meters from the cave's entrance, leaving his 43-year-old dive buddy to grapple with the grim reality below. Despite valiant efforts to rescue his stricken comrade, the depths claimed their toll, forcing the surviving diver to make a gut-wrenching decision. With a heavy heart and dwindling hope, he detached the lifeline that bound them together, leaving his buddy's lifeless body behind as he ascended to seek aid. The diver went up safe and sound, but too quickly. He was immediately transported to the hyperbaric chamber of the Saint-Pierre Clinic, but thankfully he never succumbed to any serious injuries. The alarm was raised at 3:11 p.m. and emergency responders swiftly mobilized. But the bad weather recorded for 48 hours made the rescuers think. Knowing that the level of the river, Le Verdouble, had risen by 50 centimeters, and that it is connected to the abyss by underground tracks, those responsible for the rescue on site believed that attempting a body recovery at 6 p.m. represented a real danger. The scuba dive of the Speleo Secure Francois team started at 10:35 p.m., which lasted 40 minutes. Amidst treacherous weather conditions and rising waters, firefighters and gendarmes coordinated a rescue operation fraught with peril. As the river Le Verdouble surged, threatening to engulf the abyss below, divers from the Orléans Sainte-Marie in the Pyrenees Atlantique braved the depths to retrieve the fallen diver's body. The two divers found the lifeless body of the victim 135 meters from the entrance at a depth of 36 meters between two boulders, with his regulator out of his mouth. In the somber aftermath, questions lingered and hearts weighed heavy with sorrow. Amidst the chaos and grief, an investigation unfolded. The details emerged slowly, revealing the grim reality of a recreational dive turned tragic, but the specific details of this incident was never revealed to the public. It was speculated this was done to protect the image of Font Estramar, as not to hurt its appeal to divers around Europe. As condolences poured in from all corners, the family, friends, and loved ones of the fallen diver grappled with the harsh reality of their loss. Just 4 years later, Font Estramar found itself thrust into the spotlight once again. On this occasion, the victim was 52-year-old Jean-Luc Armengol, a fisherman and dedicated volunteer firefighter from Morrison, who was known for his unwavering commitment to his community and his passion for exploration. Affectionately dubbed Rambo for his impressive physical prowess, Jean-Luc was revered for his technical skill and his intimate knowledge of the natural world. From the practice of caving, he had done it as more than a hobby and had specialized in the exploration of underground galleries in the Clap. This is how he rendered countless services to Gruson, exploring caves and cavities, but also guts in search of sources. As a stalwart member of the Reconnaissance and Intervention Group in perilous environments, GRIMP, and the Spédios Secure François, SSF, Jean-Luc had spent 2 decades serving on the front lines of rescue missions and exploration efforts and had reached the rank of Chief Corporal. Jean was a man who deepened everything that interested him. He also chaired another association, the Gracie Noir Military Heritage, for which he was looking for museum pieces. He was working to preserve and renovate the blockhouses of the Second World War on the territory of the municipality. His loss was deeply felt not only by his fellow firefighters, but also by the entire village of Gruson, where his impact extended far beyond his roles as a firefighter and fisherman. Jean-Luc's passion for exploration led him to delve into the depths of Font Estramar on a fateful night dive on Friday, May the 25th, 2012. It was a dive he had undertaken solo many times before, but on this occasion, tragedy struck. His companion raised the alarm when Jean-Luc failed to resurface, triggering a frantic search by the firefighters' divers brigade. Sadly, Jean-Luc's lifeless body was discovered just meters from the chasm's exit, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Gruson. As authorities launched an investigation to unravel the circumstances of his untimely demise, 2 major hypotheses emerged. Either a sudden medical emergency had incapacitated Jean-Luc, or a mechanical malfunction had compromised his rebreather. Amidst the grief and speculation, one thing remained certain: Jean-Luc Armengol's legacy as a fearless explorer and dedicated community servant would endure, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of all who knew him. Jean-Luc was a very human person, expressed with emotion Major Roland Gerard, in charge of the GRIMP. He was very attached to human values and the homeland. He was an excellent teammate, and as a speleologist, he handled the ropes with great technicality. Jean-Luc had a very fine knowledge of the natural environment, and we counted on him with our eyes closed. Jean-Luc Armengol is survived by his 2 children, aged 28 and 32, who continue to keep his legacy alive. 4 years passed before Font Estramar claimed yet another life. The victim, a 50-year-old diver from Sete, Hérault, met his untimely demise during an exploration of the cave on January the 23rd, 2016. Details surrounding the incident were scarce, mirroring the veil of secrecy that had resembled previous tragedies at Font Estramar. The diver's identity remained concealed from the public, adding to the enigma surrounding the chasm's waters. The victim's diving buddy came to the surface to alert the rescuers before he was placed in a hyperbaric chamber. The divers of CODIS 66 recovered the diver in cardiorespiratory arrest. Despite all their efforts, they were unable to revive him, and the diver died on the spot. At the time of the diving incident, the victim was in the well of the draperies, not far from the exit, at a depth of 30 meters. The divers were equipped with 2 10-liter bottles of compressed air, which meant that they did not want to venture very far into the cave. 1 year later, Font Estramar would have its 5th fatality. During the summer of 2017, a team of 5 cave divers from Finland travelled to southern France for a cave diving holiday. The plan was to spend 2 weeks in the region and dive caves that they had been diving already before. From June the 9th to the 10th, the plan was to dive Font Estramar. The first dive day was a set-up day where all safety tanks were installed to the cave and check up for the conditions of the water and line system. The second day was supposed to be the deep dive to approximately 200 meters depth. The team consisted of 2 deep divers, 2 support divers, and 1 person who would wait on the surface. On the set-up dive on the morning of Friday, June the 9th, 2017, the maximum depth was 160 meters for the deep team and 70 meters for the support team. A total of 20 safety tanks were installed to various depths for the next day. Water conditions were good, clear visibility, and 18 degrees Celsius temperature. After the dive, the teams rested and started to prepare for the next day. On Saturday, June 10th, 2017, the deep diving team, which consisted of divers 1 and 2, started their descent approximately at 9 a.m. During the descent, they installed an additional backup rebreather to 100 meters. When they arrived at 200 meters depth, Diver 1 heard a loud noise behind him. When turning around, he saw that the scooter of Diver 2 had imploded and was dragging Diver 2 deeper. The scooter was attached to the diver with a pulling cord and a clip. Diver 2 was not able to release the negative scooter and was trying aggressively to swim up. Diver 1 swam after him to help and was able to cut the towing cord in 214-meter depth, and they stopped descending. The imploded scooter continued to descend. Visibility was very bad during this event, and the divers had to look for the lost guideline. During their search, they found themselves in a dead end. After a quick search, Diver 1 found the guideline and was able to help Diver 2 also to the line. But Diver 2 had already suffered from reduced ability to work. Soon the situation escalated when Diver 2 got stuck in the loose guidelines. Diver 1 tried to cut the guidelines and told Diver 2 to calm down, but he was already suffering from reduced level of consciousness, and very soon he went unconscious. Diver 1 could not do any more to help his friend and was forced to leave in order to save himself. Diver 1 started his decompression from 130 meters, and the total deco time was 450 minutes at this point. Safety divers started their dive 100 minutes after the dive team started, and when meeting Diver 1, they received the information what had happened. Diver 1 was escorted to shallow water and kept under a surveillance during the decompression. Message about the accident was brought up, and Diver 5, the surface person, made the emergency call. The police and fire department arrived before Diver 1 was surfaced, and the fire department divers took the safety diver responsibility for the rest of the decompression. Diver 1 finally surfaced after 500 minutes of dive time in good physical health. The team, hired by the SSF under judicial requisition, completed its mission on June the 18th, 2017. Frederick Sharczynski reached a depth of 234 meters in Font Estramar to find the body of the missing diver. He made a video and recovered the victim's computer, which he handed over to the judicial authorities. The operation lasted 4 days, during which time the cave was equipped with a safety line dimensioned for the planned dives. When asked about the feasibility of recovering the body, none of those involved said it was feasible without excessive risk. 1 year later, Font Estramar claimed yet another unfortunate soul, adding another tragic chapter to its publicized history of death. Mark Schwarzny, born in Antwerp, February 1st, 1962, was an adventurer, sportsman, keynote speaker, mental coach, and author. Through extreme sports, he searched to overcome his mental and physical boundaries. He broke several records, including for swimming across the English Channel, sky jumping from a balloon, climbing the Annapurna without an oxygen mask and gliding above the Andes, and participated many times in the European and World Championships in different disciplines. During the last few years, Mark focused on coaching executive teams and high-level athletes. Mark Schwarzny had also been a member of the Belgian Davis Cup tennis team and was also an accomplished fencer. During his dive, which took place on June the 28th, 2018, Mark and his buddy got separated when their buddy line broke at 125 meters depth in the vertical gallery, Puig de Locum. His buddy, Denis Kozlau, could reach the surface. He didn't. The dive was preceded by 2 preparation days: the route preparation, bailout and decompression station preparation. The dive took place on an open cycle, using diver propulsion vehicles. The dive involved 16 cylinders and 3 diver propulsion vehicles and dry suits. Bottom gas, Trimix 960 stage, and bailout gases, Trimix 2030, EAN 32, deco gases EAN 50, EAN 80, EAN 100. The maximum permissible depth was planned at 125 meters, the estimated maximum distance of 550 meters from the entrance. At the final stage of the dive in the vertical gallery, Puig de Locum, 23 to 25 minutes after their initial descent at depth 100 meters, Mark ignored the breakage of the main line and did not, responding on the signals, continue descent to a depth of 114 to 117 meters, where the gallery does a sharp turn. This point was the last place of visual contact with Mark. Primary search and rescue lasted until 3 a.m. the next day, but unfortunately did not bring any results. The repeated search operation began at the request of the Prosecutor of the Republic on July the 9th, 2018. The initial decision was to not organize a search for Mark because of risks, and the family agreed. But then the authorities decided to send a search party, which led to another death. On June the 9th, 2018, at 8 a.m., began a search operation consisting of 16 people and Unit Speedio Secure Francois on the detection and lifting of the body of Marc Schwarzny. During their preparatory work and search in the Parc Zebra area, rescuer Laurent Richaud failed to resurface. The operation had started well, with the first dive of recognition by the pair of divers who visited the side galleries on the network. However, there was an incident during the return of the mission, at the time that the divers emerged from the resurgence. Laurent Richaud's body was rushed to the surface by his dive partner. Laurent died while trying to shoot a video on the state of the emergency. Besides the provided facts, no further information, such as the cause of Laurent's untimely passing, was ever released. According to the friends of NSS CDS instructors, Mark was completely unprepared for such dives. Yes, he was extreme, but such dives require global training. It would not be until September the 3rd, 2018, that Mark's body was retrieved from the cave, bringing closure to his family and friends. Deceived by a few quiet years incident-free, the public dared to believe that Font Estramar's dark history had reached its conclusion. However, disaster struck once more, claiming its most recent victim to date on July the 19th, 2023. Engineer by profession, living in the Clermont-Ferrand in the Puy de Dôme, Dominique Azam was also a very experienced diver. He was an emeritus diver who had been part of Luc Long's team for about 10 years, an underwater archaeologist who, in 2008, discovered one of the only busts of Julius Caesar carved during his lifetime, immersed in the Rhone. Beyond his professional qualities, he was a very endearing person, a big kid, pleasant and helpful. Dom had a handicap, but he did not let it limit him. Dominique suffered from deafness, so in diving he was his happiest. Underwater, his team all communicate by signs. It compensated. On Wednesday, July the 19th, 2023, Dominique arrived at Font Estramar with his dive buddy. After their bottom time, Dominique reportedly had a heart attack during the ascent. Despite the care of the friend who accompanied him, then help, he unfortunately did not survive. Font Estramar stands as a paradox, a captivating abyss that has both lured explorers with its beauty and claimed lives with its treacherous depths. From the early days of Commander Cousteau's exploration to the recent tragedies that befell daring divers, Font Estramar remains a mystery that has left the cave diving community with more questions than answers. The underwater caverns behind Kukulka have held a sinister fascination for divers ever since they were discovered during the 1970s. The unexplored caves are interconnected and are believed to be among the largest in the world. A dive shop at San Pedro brought 7 divers over to dive the giant cave of Kukulka. 5 lived to tell about it. It was a classic dive, in the respect that, if anything could be done wrong, they did it. Their tales serve as both a celebration of lives dedicated to exploration and a chilling reminder of the do's and don'ts when dangers lurking beneath the ocean's surface. Adolfo Ayonza was born on February the 20th, 1950, in the quiet coastal town of Xcalac, Quintana Roo, Mexico. His family, like many in the area, relied on the sea for their livelihood, and at an early age, Adolfo developed a deep connection with the water. When he was just a baby, the Ayonza family moved to San Pedro and Bagris Cay, Belize. This small fishing village, with its turquoise waters and vibrant coral reefs, became Adolfo's new home and playground. The sea was more than just a source of food or income for Adolfo. It was where he felt most alive. As a young boy, Adolfo was often found by the water's edge, his feet dangling off the docks, his eyes scanning the horizon for the next adventure. By the time he was 12, he was already joining his father and elder brother on diving expeditions, collecting lobster from the reefs that stretched across the Belizean coastline. These early experiences taught him how to navigate the often treacherous underwater terrain, skills that would one day define his career as one of the region's most respected dive masters. Adolfo wasn't just any diver. He was exceptional. By 18, he had already built a reputation for his remarkable lung capacity and ability to remain calm in the most stressful underwater situations. Adolfo could dive and only use 1,000 psi on a 60-minute dive. This is highly impressive because it demonstrated exceptional control over his breathing and efficient air consumption. Most divers use significantly more air in the same time frame, especially at deeper depths or when exerting themselves. His ability to maintain such a low air usage suggested a deep level of experience, a calm demeanor, and an advanced understanding of how to move and breathe underwater efficiently. His peers would often marvel at how effortlessly he could move through the water, sometimes using only half the air his fellow divers would need. This skill would later become a trademark of his, earning him a place among the top divers in the region. Adolfo's cousin, Ramon Nunes, had been the first certified diver on the Ambergris Cay, and it wasn't long before Adolfo followed in his footsteps. Along with his childhood friends, Eduardo Brown and Gil Gonzalez, Adolfo became one of the most sought-after dive instructors, taking tourists and adventurers alike into the stunning underwater caves and coral reefs of Belize. By 1969, at just 19 years old, Adolfo married his childhood sweetheart, Yolanda, and together they raised 4 children. It wasn't long before Adolfo's passion for diving turned into a thriving business. He became one of the first native Belizeans to own and operate a dive shop, the famous Dancing Dolphin, which was affiliated with Ramon's Village, a premier dive destination. Adolfo's reputation wasn't just built on his diving skills. Those who knew him always mentioned his infectious smile, his love for life, and his constant willingness to help others. Whether he was teaching a novice diver how to breathe calmly underwater, or leading experienced divers through some of the most intricate cave systems, Adolfo exuded confidence and warmth. His clients trusted him, and his fellow divers respected him. But even the best divers, those who command the sea like they belong to it, can sometimes fall prey to its unforgiving nature. The Kukulka Giant Cave, located beneath the island of Kukulka, Belize, is one of the largest and most intricate underwater cave systems in the world. This ancient cave system stretches thousands of feet in length, featuring narrow tunnels, vast chambers, and a maze-like layout that challenges even the most experienced divers. The cave is known for its highly decorated interior, with stunning stalactites, stalagmites, and fossil formations that date back thousands of years. The cave has not been surveyed, but it has been measured to be 670 meters long by 550 meters wide, and the ceiling height ranges from 7 to 25 meters. Diving depths within the cave vary considerably, with sections reaching depths of over 33 meters. The cave's tomb line plunges down to 46 meters, while other areas like the swimming pool hover around 18 to 19 feet. The cave system is interconnected by numerous small passageways, some so narrow that divers must remove their tanks to fit through. This confined environment significantly increases the risks of disorientation and entrapment. The water inside the cave is typically clear, but can become cloudy with silt, particularly in the more remote and unexplored areas. The entrance to Kukulka Giant Cave is notorious for being difficult to navigate, requiring divers to be both full cave certificated and decompression procedures certified. The entrance is a 3 to 5 meter diameter pit with a constriction or two that drops to about 24 meters in a single large room. The room has been explored by Italian divers and by Americans. The various explorations have left scades of dive lines radiating, circumnavigating, and crisscrossing throughout the room. Following these set lines can be very confusing for a diver and has an increased risk of causing drownings. Once in the room, divers encounter both stunning geological features and technical challenges, such as low visibility, sharp turns, and sudden depth changes. Despite these dangers, the allure of the cave continues to draw divers from around the world, eager to explore its beauty and mystery. June the 2nd, 1985, began like any other day for Adolfo. The sun was shining. The waters of Kukulka were a mesmerizing shade of blue, and Adolfo was excited to lead a group of tourists from Houston on a cave diving expedition. Others in the diving party included Nico Verreira, 27, Mike Perez, 20, Damian Vasquez, 18, and Tom Walker, 19, the only other American. The group was especially eager that day. They had already experienced a full morning of diving and exploring the vibrant coral reefs, and now they were ready for the most thrilling part of their adventure, diving into a mysterious underwater cave. According to the owner of the dive shop on Kukulka, the divers came from Ambergris Cay and wanted to rent gear to dive the giant cave. He warned against diving there and would not rent them gear because his general policy is not to rent gear but sell dive trips. His group returned to San Pedro on Ambergris Cay, procured some equipment, and came back to dive the cave. Before embarking on their dive, the group made what would become an extremely erroneous and reckless decision. After spending the morning diving in the beautiful waters of Kukulka, they decided to stop by a local bar for a few drinks, which was confirmed by several witnesses on site. The carefree atmosphere, combined with the excitement of the upcoming cave dive, led them to let their guard down. They shared stories, laughed, and indulged in several rounds of beers as the Belizean sun beat down on them. For a moment, the thrill of adventure overpowered any concerns about safety. Adolfo, usually known for his professionalism and caution, didn't raise any objections. He joined the group in having a drink, eager to keep the mood light and carefree. They were confident in their skills, and the buzz from the alcohol only added to the sense of invincibility. The group had no second thoughts as they geared up and prepared to dive straight into one of the most complex cave systems in the world. No one paused to consider the potential consequences of diving after drinking, and as they boarded the boat, their carefree attitude followed them into the water. With no one to voice concern, the group dove into the depths of the cave, blissfully unaware that their negligence would soon lead to a tragedy none of them could have foreseen. Due to their impairment from the alcohol, their preparation was far from thorough. They hadn't used a continuous guideline, a crucial tool for navigating underwater caves. They were also missing backup regulators and other essential equipment. In their overconfidence, they ignored basic safety protocols, leaving them vulnerable to Kukulka's giant cave. As stated previously, the giant cave is a stunning yet dangerous sight, known for its crystal clear waters and intricate cave systems. The entrance to the cave lies hidden beneath the surface, an inviting but ominous gateway to the unknown. As the group descended into the cave with no guideline, the water around them was eerily calm. Adolfo and Art were the first to enter through the narrow opening that led to a series of interconnecting caves and tunnels, which appeared to stretch on for miles. Every other person seemed to have light, single tanks without backup regulators or octopuses, and their plan was to turn around at 80 feet, which is known as a moderately narrow section of the cave. The light from above began to fade as they ventured deeper into the abyss. Adolfo, leading the group with his years of experience guiding his every move, was closely followed by the rest of the divers, their excitement mixed with a growing sense of unease. At the jog, the third person in line, Mike Perez, felt very uneasy and wanted to get out. He later related that he became alarmed when Art approached him in the darkness, apparently in a state of panic, and then disappeared from view. The last three divers to enter, including Mike, decided it was best to head back to the surface. Still at the jog, both Adolfo and Art, still in the water, began to struggle. The cave's labyrinth-like design made it easy to lose direction, and soon both men found themselves disorientated, which was only exacerbated by the alcohol. The water pressure, the narrow confines, and the growing darkness heightened their anxiety. Art Williams, who had been right behind Adolfo, panicked. His breathing quickened, and he began to drift uncontrollably through the cave's passageways. The rest of the group, still following the dive plan to the surface, hadn't realized the extent of the unfolding emergency. Upon the three divers reaching the surface, Mike, who was the last person to see Art's frantic movements, quickly alerted the safety divers on the surface. The remaining divers scrambled to understand what was happening, but by then, it was too late. Adolfo and Art were lost in the cave's depths, their lives hanging in the balance. Adolfo's younger brother, Peter Eso, who was on the surface at the time, acted quickly, along with another fellow team member. As they ventured deeper into the cave, the passageways became narrower and the visibility worsened. The once pristine waters were now clouded with silt, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. When they got to the jog, they ran into Art, who was disorientated and in a state of panic. After they got to him, they waited until he became unconscious and then took him to the surface. He had 500 psi left in his tank when he was taken out of the water, and when asked if they gave him CPR, they said yes. They put the regulator in his mouth and pushed the purge button. Despite their best efforts to revive him, it was clear that Art had drowned, which was confirmed by a post-mortem examination performed in Belize City. A big question still remained at hand. Where was Adolfo? They started bounce diving, looking for Adolfo. One of the team members made 5 dives that afternoon without any knowledge of the decompression tables. When another diver diving the sea returned from his dive, they stopped him to see if he could help them. The diver told them that he had just finished a deep dive and would have too much decompression time to do. Since it was 3.5 hours since Adolfo had made his entry, the diver didn't think there was a chance of him being alive. The search for Adolfo would last several agonizing days. Specifically, attempts to find Adolfo lasted all day Monday and continued into Tuesday and Wednesday. Divers from San Pedro, Kukulka, and even the British garrison joined the efforts to find him. They scoured the cave, navigating its treacherous twists and turns, hoping to find Adolfo alive. But as the days passed, hope began to fade. The cave's depths, with its unforgiving darkness and intricate passageways, had claimed Belize's national treasure. Adolfo's body was never recovered. They concede that he must have drowned, trapped perhaps in a crevice or having lost his way in the darkness and was unable to find breathing space. The news of Adolfo's death sent shockwaves through the community. In San Pedro, where he had grown up and become a beloved figure, the loss was felt deeply. Friends, family, and fellow divers mourned the passing of a man who had given so much to his community. A memorial service was held in both his and Art's honor, with a 35-boat procession to the site of the accident. There, garlands of flowers were laid at the entrance to the cave, a solemn tribute to men whose love for the ocean had ultimately claimed their life. A plaque was also placed in front of the cave with Adolfo's name on it to honor their national hero. Adolfo's wife, Yolanda, and their 4 children, Zobi, Mari, Tulita, and Adolfito, were left devastated. The man who had been their rock, their source of joy and love, was gone. His death left a void that would never be filled. Art Samuels left behind his parents, Molly and Echo Samuels, his brother Philip, and his young daughter, Erin Reza. For his family, the loss of Art will never be something they can fully heal from. In the weeks that followed, a letter from Jim Koch, a close friend of Adolfo and fellow diver, surfaced. In the letter, Jim detailed the events leading up to the tragic dive and the mistakes that had been made. According to Jim, the group had failed to follow proper safety protocols. They hadn't used a continuous guideline, a crucial tool for navigating underwater caves. They were also missing backup regulators and other essential equipment. But perhaps the most significant mistake was the decision to dive after consuming alcohol. Alcohol, even in small amounts, can impair a diver's ability to make quick decisions, react to changing conditions, and maintain proper buoyancy in the confined, disorientating environment. Along with Jim Koch's analysis, Frank Bountings also weighed in on the incident. He remarked, "Untrained open-water divers, without a continuous guideline, not saving the recommended 2/3 of their air for the exit, and lacking proper lighting, this sounds like an all too familiar recipe for disaster." Sadly. Today, Adolfo Ayoso's legacy lives on, not just in the diving community, but through his family. His son, Adolfo Ayoso Jr., followed his father's footsteps and is now one of the PADI-certified dive instructors at Ramon's Village. Adolfo Jr. teaches scuba diving to both tourists and locals, keeping alive the love for the sport that his father was so passionate about. Adolfo's humanitarian efforts in his community are still remembered. He was a proud member of the Lions Club and regularly donated his time to help children in need. Whether he was organizing charity events or raising funds for local projects, Adolfo was always giving back, ensuring that his community thrived. Though they were taken far too soon, Art's and Adolfo's love for the ocean, their joy for life, and their dedication to their family and community remain a beacon of light for all who knew them. They were men whose lives may have ended in the deep, dark waters of the sea, but whose spirit continues to shine brightly above. May Art and Adolfo rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.